remorse for a lifetime of cheating. I saw him standing in the back. I hadn't noticed him walk in, and I was completely shocked to see him here now whenever. Honestly, I believed he was really dead. His sudden appearance rendered me speechless. It was actually bad now, because I had just stepped up to the podium to give a eulogy in honor of my husband lying in the casket in front of me. Just like the last time I saw him 30 years ago, butterflies swarmed in my stomach. My breath caught and my heart malfunctioned. My stare and silence must have sparked curiosity because most people turned around to see where I was looking. It only aroused even more curiosity because out of the many people gathered for the funeral, only my little sister Elaine knew who he was. As I looked at her, I realized she didn't recognize him. I did. There was no way I didn't recognize him. He just stared at me. Then his lips stretched into a smile, he nodded at me, then turned and walked out of the funeral home. As Jim's wife for the past 20 years, I had to speak up. I was so overwhelmed that I just started talking, completely forgetting my prepared speech. I said some nonsense about Jim comforting me when I was going through a very bad time in my life. Of course, I forgot to say what caused it. I said more nonsense about having a loving husband and raising our 2 children. I talked about the wonderful, loving relationship we falsely portrayed. I talked about this alcoholic, unambitious loser as one is supposed to do at a funeral. Naturally, I kept it all quiet. I even cried. It wasn't hard for me to do. No one even realized I wasn't crying for Jim. I cried because I saw him. I played my part perfectly in the cemetery. I was the grieving widow who had just lost the love of her life. Truth be told, I was. It just wasn't Jim. In fact, I was glad the asshole was finally dead, and I was free of him. Unfortunately, I didn't realize what a complete fraud he was until it was too late. By then, I had been married to him for a couple years and was raising our 2 kids. Mallory was 5 when we got married. He adopted her. Keith came along shortly after we were married. I did it because I wasn't going to raise my children alone, and I had no choice. It was finally over. Jim's casket was lowered into the hole, and I threw flowers and a handful of earth into it. My children helped me walk away from the grave to the waiting car. I happened to look to my right and saw him standing there. He was standing a couple 100 feet away from me, leaning against a tree. My sudden stop took my kids by surprise. I stumbled as they kept moving and pulled me forward. Regaining my balance, I took another look and saw him walking away. "Bobby!" I shouted. I turned and tried to run. The high heels in the grass were not conducive to running. "Bobby! Please! Bobby! Stop! Please come back!" I shouted, trying to run. He didn't look back once. He just kept walking away. "Mom! Why?" Mallory asked, trying to stop me. "What are you doing? Who is that man?" "Please, you have to stop him. I need to talk to him. I can't let him go again." "What are you talking about, Mom? Who is he? And what do you mean you can't let him go again?" Mallory asked. It was already too late. I fell to my knees, sobbing, watching him get into the pickup truck and drive away. My heart felt like it was going to explode when I lost him again. He wasn't dead. He was alive. It didn't make any sense. If he was alive, where was he and why never came home? I mourned for him. I had been destroyed when he disappeared. Now I was destroyed again by his sudden reappearance. That was 30 years ago, give or take a few months. My wonderful husband Bobby was due back tonight from his business trip. I had wonderful news for him and was preparing his favorite dinner to celebrate. I even had a bottle of Merlot waiting for me. I had timed it just right. He had to be home at 6 p.m. sharp. He would have time to go upstairs, shower, and change before eating. I was going to tell him the wonderful news over dinner, and then we would celebrate for most of the evening. I even made some special underwear for later. 6:30 came and went. Traffic was probably worse than usual. 7 South, there may have been an accident on the freeway causing delays. 7:30, I was already starting to worry. 8 Gauss. Had Bobby been in an accident? By midnight, I was in a full-blown panic. At 1 a.m., I started dialing his pager number. He didn't have a cell phone at the time. Perhaps if he had been in the hospital, someone would have noticed the pager ringing and called me back. The next morning at 8 I called his office. No one had seen him or heard from him. I contacted the police and told them I was concerned because he never came home last night. They had no information, and they had no accidents last night. I had to wait until the next day to file a missing persons report. I spent the day calling all of his friends and acquaintances that I knew of. Bobby had no family left. He was the only child in the family, and his parents had died a couple years ago. No one knew anything. I called my little sister. I was in a panic, so she came over to comfort me. I kept trying to contact Bobby. Early the next morning, I was at the police station filing a missing persons report. I didn't like many of the questions I was asked. It was hinted that Bobby might be cheating on me and had just stayed at his mistress's house. I knew that Bobby would never cheat on me. Over the next few weeks, I was terrified. My sister stayed with me and tried to keep me as calm as possible. Too much stress would be bad for the child growing inside of me. This was the news I was about to break to my loving husband. He was going to be a father. We had been planning and trying for some time, and it was finally happening. The only thing they told me was that they found Bobby's abandoned car at a shopping center 2 towns away. There were no other clues. Within a month, I was in serious financial trouble. I wasn't working, and Bobby's paycheck was no longer coming in. His company fired him for not showing up. I used the money we had in savings to hire a private investigator to search for Bobby. After 2 weeks and no information, I had no money to continue. Although we had no credit card debt, there was still mortgage debt on the house. Since no money was coming in, I was already 2 months in arrears and had no way to catch up. At the time, Jim was a godsend. He was Bobby's best friend, and we had become very close over the past few years. He continued to make sure I had food and everything I needed, but couldn't help with the mounting bills. Unlike Bobby, who was smart and driven to succeed, Jim was pretty lazy and unmotivated. He also wasn't as smart as Bobby. Roughly speaking, Jim had a mania for mediocrity. The bank evicted me. Elaine only had a small studio apartment, so I couldn't stay there. With no real income, I couldn't afford my own apartment, but Jim rented a 2-bedroom trailer. I moved in with him. After all, he was taking care of me. Why didn't I try to get a job? Who would take a pregnant woman who was about to go on maternity leave? So, let me preempt your questions. Yes, I moved into Jim's bedroom. It was a 2-bedroom mobile home, so we needed 1 bedroom for the nursery. That left either the couch or Jim's bed. Besides, Jim was taking care of me. It wasn't true love, at least for me, but at least it was nice. No, it wasn't as good as it had been with Bobby, but it wasn't bad either. Eventually, Mallory was born. We went around to every second-hand store and garage sale in the area, buying everything we needed for the baby. I'll say one good thing. Jim loved Mallory. Eventually, I had to get a job as the bills got bigger and bigger and Jim lost his job again. Since I hadn't worked in several years, my choices were limited. Eventually, I was able to get a job as a sales clerk at a local department store. For the next 5 years, I continued to try to find Bobby. I couldn't afford a private investigator, but I used what little I knew about computers to find his name and any other information I could find. I kept chasing the police on his case, and I checked every anonymous body that was discovered. I never found anything. Eventually, I ran out of options. I forced myself to accept the fact that he was dead somewhere and I would never find him. Besides, Jim was pressuring me to get off my ass and get on with my life. I filed for divorce because I was being abandoned. 6 months later, Jim and I got married. 6 months after that, Keith was born. Yeah, do the math on that. Over the next 2 years, things fell into a sort of routine. I went to work. When Jim had a job, we dropped the kids off at daycare until one of us got off work to pick them up. When Jim got off work, he would watch them until I got home. I had my tubes tied when Keith was born, so we didn't have to worry about having more children. Jim started drinking more when Keith was 2 years old. It became obvious that I really didn't love him and never would. It was harder for him to find and then keep a job. When Keith was 5 years old, I first discovered he was cheating on me. I ignored it. The second cheating, I ignored that too. Then I ignored all the others. We pretty much became more like roommates than husband and wife. I'm not going to say friends with benefits because really, we weren't even friends by that point. We had sex occasionally, but it was just an exercise to relieve stress. As time went on, I really started to despise him. Looking back, I'm pretty sure I subconsciously blamed him for all my problems. We never had much money and we always seemed to be struggling to survive. I tried my best, but I was very unhappy. Nevertheless, I did my best to raise my children right. I think the kids were fine. But I couldn't help but compare my new life to the one I had with Bobby. So here we are at last. Jim's drinking and lifestyle finally caught up with him. He was in pretty bad shape by the time his heart decided he'd had enough and gave up. Elaine finally married a decent man a few years ago, and they bought a nice house to raise their 2 daughters. Mallory had graduated from college and was moving up the ranks. Keith decided to join the Navy after high school, and things were going well for him. We had just returned to my sister's house after the funeral. I had no desire to go back to a dilapidated mobile home just yet. Besides, after what happened at the cemetery, it was pretty obvious that I wasn't fit to be alone. "Why, Ellie? What happened? Who were you yelling at?" Elaine asked, sitting me down on the couch. My Bobby was there. Bobby's dead. He died 30 years ago. No. He was at the funeral home, then back at the cemetery. Look, Ellie, it's been a long, stressful day. You're just imagining it. Losing a husband after 25 years, your mind just plays tricks on you and hallucinates images of the past. You just want to believe that Bobby is there and will come back for you. No, he was there. He's still alive. He smirked at me like he knew something I didn't. Mom, who is he and why is he so important? Mallory asked. He's your father, dear. He was my first husband and the love of my life. What? But you always... I thought... How so? She stuttered. So, where has he been all this time? Keith asked. I don't know. It's just that one day he never came home. We all thought he was dead. It was a week before I could bring myself to go back to the mobile home. I knew Bobby was out there somewhere. Everyone else thought I was just imagining things. No one could explain who the man in the back of the funeral home was, but they didn't believe it was Bobby. I knew different. Life was back to normal as it could ever be. Some friends occasionally pressured me to stop after work and have a couple drinks. I was quite attractive for my age, and they would hit on me from time to time, but I always turned them down. From then on, I decided to be celibate. I knew Bobby was out there, and he would be my one and only. I had no one else. It was a year later. I came home from work one evening. I opened the door and walked in. I almost fell over when I stopped suddenly. There, sitting on the couch, was Bobby. Beep, 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 beep. Bobby? I muttered. Hi, Ellie. Are you here? I am. Where have you been and why did you disappear? You know why. No, I don't. You just never came home from your trip. You disappeared. I thought you were dead. I was dead. Sure. My heart was beating and I was breathing, but everything else was dead. I don't understand. Allie, do you remember the last time I came home from a business trip? Of course I remember. I always remember you coming home from a trip. We always made love all night, and the next day you stayed home to recuperate. No, Allie. The last time I came home. That was my last trip. You didn't come home. I waited all night, but you didn't come home. It was Thursday night, and I made a special dinner to give you the great news, but you never came home. But I did come home, Ellie. I asked you if you remembered, but you don't. You don't remember coming home because I came home on Wednesday, not Thursday. Do you remember now? He told me what happened after he came home and found me in bed with Jim. He told me about the pain he felt because of our betrayal. He told me how his spirit died right then and how he left. He told me about the 2 years he lived on the streets before he woke up from his sadness and started to move on. He told me about how he felt he had lost everything he held dear, especially when he heard me tell Jim that he was actually his daughter's father. He said he started hiding his name and took his mother's maiden name while he created a new life for himself. He changed jobs and was constantly moving from place to place. He kept in touch with my life out of curiosity. He knew about the divorce from a public announcement in the newspaper. A few years after that, he met another woman and eventually married. They had 3 children who were almost grown by then. I was so overwhelmed with remorse that I couldn't bring myself to tell him the one important thing I needed. I just couldn't hurt him again. When he left, I just shut down with remorse and grief. It was 2 days later when my sister found me in a catatonic state on my couch. I hadn't moved since Bobby left that evening. I couldn't bring myself to act. I was severely dehydrated and hadn't eaten anything. She couldn't get me to respond. I just sat there staring into space. Eventually, she called Mallory to help her get me into the car and drive me to her house. My clothes were a mess, so Mallory grabbed a couple changes of clothes and followed Elaine home. They washed and dressed me together in my underwear and sweatpants that Mallory grabbed. Then they sat me down on the couch. They managed to pour some water into my mouth for me to drink. The only reaction I had was the occasional tear that ran down my cheek. I sat there for hours before I finally started to come to my senses. "Allie?" Elaine asked. "Oh my God, what happened to you?" "It was Bobby. He came to see me." "You mean in your sleep?" "No. He was at my house when I came home." "Ellie, Bobby's dead. You have to accept that." "He's not dead, at least not physically. He knew. He caught me, and I never knew it." "What do you mean he caught you, Mom?" Mallory asked. He came home, and I never saw him again. I didn't know. I don't understand. You waited all night and you never saw him come home?" "No, not that night. He came home the night before. He came home a day early, and I didn't see him." "What are you talking about?" "I was having an affair with Jim. Bobby came home a day early and saw Jim making love to me in our bed. We didn't even notice. He heard me tell Jim that he was actually Mallory's father. Bobby just quietly walked away and disappeared. He was alive the whole time. He just left me." "Then where was he all this time?" "Wait a minute. So, if you were having an affair with Jim, why did you tell me Bobby was my father? You always told everyone that Jim was my biological father." "I just said it because it was easier. Jim was helping us and that made him happy. Anyway, the odds were 50-50. I never told anyone that I had a DNA test done a few years ago, and it was confirmed that you were Bobby's daughter." "Mallory, I was walking away from the grave after my mother's funeral. Mom was never the same after Bobby talked to her that night. As far as I knew, she never heard from him again. I tried several times to find him and talk to him, but to no avail. Mom never went on dates. She had offers, but she turned them all down. She stopped living and just existed. Even being around her grandchildren hardly brought her out of her sadness. I heard her once mutter something about wanting to share this time with her husband. I knew she wasn't thinking about Jim. I was walking back to the car with my husband and 3 kids when I saw him. He was older than I remembered, but that was to be expected. After telling my husband I wouldn't be long, I turned and walked over to him. "Are you Bobby?" "Yes," he answered. "Why are you here?" "Wasn't it obvious? She was my other half. I've always loved her and always will." "Then why did you leave? Do you love your husband?" "Of course I do. Imagine coming home one day and finding him in your bed with your best friend. Then imagine she tells him she's pregnant with his child. What would you do?" I didn't have an answer for that. They were the two people in this world that I could rely on for everything. They destroyed everything I believed in. I had to leave before I destroyed myself and them too. I eventually got through it, but it took a couple years. I have a different life now. I have a wife and 3 grown children. I had to come to pay my respects to a woman who once meant more to me than life itself. I am sorry for your loss, and though I have not said it before, I am also sorry for the loss of your father a few years ago. With those words, he turned to leave. I held out my hand to stop him. When he turned around, I said, "My mom lied. My father is not dead, and I would like the opportunity to get to know him a little." A sad smile appeared on his face. He took my hand and gently removed it from his shoulder. "It takes a lot more than being a donor to be a father. You look like a wonderful lady. Your parents obviously raised you right. It's best not to touch a sleeping dog. Now that my Ellie's gone, maybe I can finally find some peace. Goodbye, Mallory. May you and your husband have a long, happy life together." With those words, he left. I never saw him again. A few years later, I learned of his death. I actually attended the funeral. I listened to his wife, son, 2 daughters, and several friends talk about what a wonderful man he was. They also talked about the bouts of deep sadness he went through. He never talked about the reasons for his sadness, but would come around after a couple days. No one talked about his life before coming to this town, and no one seemed to know anything about his past. I stayed in the back seat to stay out of the way. It was late evening. The funeral was long over, and the workers were already filling in his grave. I sat on a small bench near his grave and cried for the loss caused by the stupidity of 2 people long ago. If my mother and my father's best friend hadn't had an affair— "Are you okay?" A woman's voice sounded behind me. Turning around, I saw it was Bobby's daughter. "I will be," I replied. "I saw you at Dad's funeral, but I don't recognize you. How do you know him?" To tell you the truth, I barely knew him. In fact, I only talked to him once in my life. I asked him to let me get to know him better, but he refused. "If you only spoke to him once, why did you come to his funeral? Do you remember his bouts of sadness? They were at least partially caused by me. You see, I talked to him at my mother's funeral. He was married to my mother, but he didn't think I was his daughter. I went to the funeral to pay my respects to my biological father. 2 people gave into their desires. The pain they caused turned into decades of pain and sorrow for themselves and others. My mother and father repented for decades over the destruction of their marriage, the loss of a deep friendship, and the loss of the only true love in my mother's life. My father suffered the loss of his soulmate, his best friend, and his daughter. I am now suffering from the fact that I never truly knew my father." The end. Subscribe to my channel. Thank you.